Good afternoon. This is the video on memory, and I'm just going to jump in since we only have 15 minutes for this video before it stops. So, memory. So what is memory? Memory is our ability to encode, to store, retain, and then later recall information and past experiences. Encoding, in case you're wondering, takes place after perception and is the first step in creating a new memory. So the perceived item of interest is converted into a mental representation that can be stored by the brain. So what does memory allow us to do? It allows us to use what we've learned and experienced in the past to shape our current actions and behavior and guide our future actions. Memory gives us the capability to learn and adapt from previous experiences. So you can think of it as helping us be more successful going forward. There are three types of memory, and we'll talk about each of them in turn. So the sensory memory, short-term memory processes, and that includes immediate memory and active working memory, and then long-term memory. And here's a visual, a graphic kind of depicting the three memory systems. And of course, before anything happens, you have to perceive it. So sensory memory was the first memory system. We'll talk about that. So the very first step, as we mentioned, in the creation of a memory is perception. So a stimulus, or what we want to remember, must first be perceived by our senses. And remember, our last unit was on perception. Sensory memory is what allows a perception to actually linger after that stimulation is over or has disappeared from view, or, for example, if you're listening to music, has stopped. What do you think could interfere with a person's sensory memory? Well, if a student has a problem with language-mediated tasks, due to language problems, then the information that the person is trying to learn would not be correctly represented in his or her sensory memory. And of course, that has a domino effect on the student's ability to recall that information. How long can you hold onto those bits of information in your sensory memory? As our reading said, is very brief. It's literally just milliseconds to seconds. It's very, very brief. All right, short-term memory has two parts. First, we're going to talk about immediate memory. And what is the role of immediate memory? Immediate memory lets us hold onto information in our heads long enough for us to make connections or add to it. How many bits of information can we hold onto in our immediate memory? They used to think it was 7 plus or minus 2, and that's why, for example, telephone numbers are not very long so that we can all remember. But with further research now, scientists are beginning to believe that it's really more like four chunks of information. And how long can you hold on to those chunks of information in your immediate memory? It's about 20 to 30 seconds. Not very long, but long enough for us to do something with that information. The second component of short-term memory is called active working memory. And this is where conscious processing of information takes place. So your mind is actually working with the information that you're trying to recall. The role of active working memory. This is the place where new information is compared to old information that you have. And the working memory holds information long enough so that you can employ strategies to help you remember it. You can rehearse, for example, and use other memory strategies that we'll be talking about. Think about school-related tasks. How do you think active working memory affects reading or math? Can a student who has a weak active working memory do well in reading or math? Think about that. How long can you hold information in active working memory? It's best to think of it as a temporary way station, but we can retain that information for minutes, hours, and even days if you have elaborated on that information. You need to be careful though, because even though you can recall that information for even up to several days after the event, there's no guarantee that it will after that point, move into your long-term memory. You've got to do more to make it stick in your long-term memory. What factors do you think affect your immediate memory and your active working memory? Researchers have found 4 factors, and these are the intent to remember, the interest in the topic. So is this personally interesting to you? Your intent to remember. Do you want to remember? Are you trying to remember? Your understanding of the concepts, and then your prior knowledge of the topic. Types of problems that a student could have with short-term memory. There are 4. First one is attentional dysfunction. You first must be paying attention in order to properly encode the information into your memory. Weak processing. So if you haven't truly gotten it into your head what this is about, you won't be able to remember it. Weak paraphrasing skills. Paraphrasing is an important skill because you have to be able to condense down the essence of what is important of what you're learning. And then the failure to use memory strategies. There are lots of strategies out there to help us remember, but if you don't use them, you won't be successful in remembering. Long-term memory is the 3rd memory system, and this refers to memories that are retained for longer than 24 hours. What do you think is the most important factor in determining whether a series of facts that you're trying to remember will be transferred to your long-term memory? The key factor is this information personally relevant for me? Does it have personal meaning for me? If it does, you're more likely to remember it long-term. Here's a graphic of the long-term memory system. You can see it's broken down into 2 components. First one is explicit memory, and those are our declarative memories. And then implicit memory, and those are non-declarative memories. And you can kind of see those are broken down even more. Examples. So declarative knowledge, I know that. So this is being able to talk about facts, information, things that you know that you can talk about. Then there's procedural knowledge. I know how to pronounce and comprehend new vocabulary. It's procedures. And then episodic knowledge. I remember when. And this is when you're able to describe experiences, personal biographical information that you can recall. You can kind of see the word episode in there. It's events that have taken place. All right, so the first type of long-term memory was non-declarative, so a little bit more about that. This is content or skill that is learned through repetition. So as a teacher, a strategy you could use is to create songs for kids and use metaphors to help them remember the information. Those are conditioned responses. You hear that tune and the words, if you will, the information just comes out. Procedural memory. This is referred to as muscle memory. So this is you remembering how to do something, and it's like your body remembers without you even necessarily trying to remember. So how could you as a teacher tap this procedural memory system? You can incorporate movement. And I think more and more teachers nowadays are trying to include movement and put information to movement and song as well to help kids remember. Now, procedural memory also includes non-motor procedures, such as remembering the steps in a math problem. And this is what children rely on. Once they have memorized a procedure for solving math, this is what they rely on, procedural memory. The third type of non-declarative memory is called emotional memory. It's really like emotional reflexes almost, okay? And this is the most powerful memory system for humans. You as a teacher, how can you tap this memory system? You can try and personalize the learning for children. Tell stories. Have the children put on debates where some of the students are presenting the one side of the story or event, whatever it is that you're talking about and trying to learn, and the other students represent the other side of the debate. You can also have students engage in role playing where they assume the identity, if you will, of, let's say, some historical figures they're learning about, the presidents or some historical event. You can have them role play. This helps them remember because they're kind of taking on that person persona, if you will, and kind of acting out what that person would do, and in fact what he or she did that made that such an important historical event. The second type of long-term memory is declarative memory. Now these, we're talking about memory for facts and events that can be discussed. Declarative memory, you can see the word declare in there. So this is memory for facts and events that can be discussed. Effort is required in order to remember this kind of information. We actually have to try. It's not like an automatic response. Declarative memory relies heavily on short-term and working memory. So if a student has weak short-term and working memory, they're going to have a very difficult time with declarative memory. And of course, this is the kind of memory that's most needed in schools. You think of how much information, all the sciences, all the history, social studies, geography, even English to some extent. is about learning a lot of names and